The flight attendant's hand was already wrapped around Helena's wrists before anyone in first class had the chance to look up from their drinks. "Ma'am, you need to come with me." The attendant's voice carried the particular brand of rehearsed calm that people deploy when they've already decided they don't care what you say next. Her name tag read Jessica. Her grip was firm. Her smile was professional. Her eyes were everywhere except on Helena's face. Helena did not move. She had not planned to move. She was sitting in seat 2A, the window seat, her boarding pass still folded neatly in the front pocket of her bag, her seatbelt already fastened exactly as the airline's own safety card recommended. The bruise along her left cheekbone caught the overhead lighting and held it. The slight swelling above her eyebrow had been iced twice since yesterday. The careful, measured way she had been breathing since she sat down, 4 counts in, 4 counts out, was the kind of deliberate care that happens when 2 of your ribs remind you of their existence every time your lungs expand. None of that had anything to do with what was happening right now. "I have a first-class ticket," Helena said. Her voice was quiet. She was the kind of woman who had spent years learning to keep her voice quiet in rooms where loud things were already happening. "Seat 2A. I boarded with that ticket 40 minutes ago." "I understand that, ma'am." Jessica did not loosen her grip. "But we have a situation and we're going to need you to relocate to economy for this flight." "A situation?" Helena repeated the words the way you repeat something when you are testing exactly how absurd it sounds, said out loud by another human being. "What situation?" From 3 rows behind her, the answer walked itself forward in 4-inch heels and a cloud of Chanel No. 5 that cost more per ounce than most people's weekly groceries. Vivian Ashford Cole moved through first class the way she moved through every room, with the particular confidence of someone who had never once in her life been genuinely told that the world did not, in fact, belong to her by divine arrangement. She was in her mid-40s, blonde in the way that requires quarterly professional maintenance. She was wearing a coat that had its own editorial feature in a magazine that most people had heard of. Her travel assistant followed 2 steps behind her, dragging a carry-on monogrammed with the initials VAC and wearing the expression of a person who had stopped having personal opinions sometime around 2019. "That's my seat," Vivian said simply. She didn't say it to Helena. She said it to Jessica, the way you say something to a hotel concierge about a reservation that has been mishandled. "I always have 2A on this route. This is a clerical error on your end, and I need it resolved before departure." "Ms. Ashford Cole," Jessica said, with a warmth she had not applied even once in her exchanges with Helena, "we sincerely apologize for the confusion. We are going to get this sorted out for you right now." "I'm not moving," Helena said. Jessica's grip tightened fractionally. "Ma'am, I really need you to cooperate here. Ms. Ashford Cole is a platinum-tier member with a long-standing relationship with our airline, and she has a seating preference on file for this exact—" "Stop." Helena's voice did not rise. She did not need it to. "You cannot remove a passenger from a seat they legally occupy in order to accommodate another passenger's seating preference. That is a Department of Transportation regulation. Involuntary removal requires a specific and documented process, and displacing a boarded passenger for a preference, not a safety issue, not an operational necessity, a preference, is not a legal basis for removal. You know this." A beat of silence moved through the first-class cabin like a weather front. 3 other passengers had stopped pretending to read their newspapers. One of them, a man in a gray suit in seat 4C, sat up slightly. Jessica's expression recalibrated, not to agreement, to the particular expression of someone who knows they're wrong and is calculating whether it matters. Vivian finally looked at Helena then. The look was slow and thorough. It traveled from Helena's shoes, practical, flat, chosen for a woman managing a body in pain, up to her coat, which was good but understated, and settled on the bruise along her cheekbone with an expression that Vivian could not control quickly enough and that 3 phones in first class would later capture and frame. "Is there something wrong with her?" Vivian asked Jessica, as though Helena were a seat feature being described in a brochure rather than a woman sitting 3 feet away. Ma'am, I am sitting right here. I can see that. Vivian opened her handbag and retrieved her phone with the practiced efficiency of someone who had deployed this particular weapon before. I'm going to call your supervisor right now, and then I'm going to call your supervisor's supervisor, and then I'm going to post about this on every platform I use, and I have 4 million followers across them, all of whom travel frequently, so if I were you, go ahead, Helena said quietly. The words landed strangely. Vivian was not accustomed to being told to go ahead. It disrupted the geometry of the exchange. 2 more flight attendants appeared, summoned by whatever silent frequency first-class disruptions generate in airline staff. One of them, Derek, was the senior attendant, silvered at his temples, 20 years of managing airborne situations, the practiced composure of someone who had seen enough to know when something was about to become a problem. He leaned close to Jessica, and they exchanged 4 low words that Helena couldn't catch. Then Derek straightened his jacket and addressed her directly. "Ms. Anderson," he said. He had been to the manifest. The fact that he knew her name and was using it told her several things simultaneously. "I deeply regret this inconvenience. We'd like to offer you a complimentary upgrade to our executive economy suite, along with travel credits valued at $500, valid on any transcontinental route within the next—" "No," Helena said. "Ma'am." I said no. She looked at him steadily. "I am injured. I have a first-class ticket for this flight, for this seat. I boarded this aircraft legally. I am seated, my seatbelt is fastened, and I am not moving to economy. I want to be very clear with you about what I'm saying and what I'm not saying. I am not causing a scene. I am not being aggressive. I am telling you calmly that I have a right to be in this seat, and I intend to stay in it." Derek looked at Jessica. Jessica looked at Derek. Something passed between them, the transmission of a decision that neither of them wanted to own individually. Vivian made a sound of sharp impatience. "Oh, for heaven's sake, it is a 2-hour flight. Can we please just—" "Do not," Helena said, and this time there was something additional in her voice, something quiet and absolutely certain. "Discuss my body or my situation as though they are inconveniences you're routing around. I heard what you asked. I'm not an object that's in the wrong position." The cabin went absolutely still. The man in 4C had his phone out now and was not pretending he was doing anything other than filming. Derek adjusted his lapel. He made the decision that would rearrange the entire trajectory of his professional life without his knowledge or consent. "Ms. Anderson," he said, "I'm afraid we're going to need to ask you to disembark the aircraft." Helena looked out the window for a long moment. She looked at the runway, gray, flat, indifferent. She looked at her own reflection in the glass, briefly. Then she looked back at Derek, and then at Jessica, and then at Vivian, who had already begun shifting towards seat 2A with the efficiency of someone who had already stopped thinking about what it had taken to get there. Then Helena Anderson walked off the plane. She did not say another word. Behind her, Vivian called for a glass of champagne. In the terminal at Gate 22, Helena sat down on a bench near the window and did not cry. She had learned to stop crying in public years ago, not because she was ashamed of it, but because public tears invited a specific kind of attention that she had never needed, and needed less than ever right now. She pressed 2 fingers lightly against her left side, testing the ribs, and breathed through the count of 4. Her phone buzzed, a text from a number saved only as a string of digits she'd had memorized since she was 15. "You'll be on a private flight within the hour. Don't eat the terminal food. I'll have Celeste bring you something actual before you board." She read it twice. She looked at the departure board above Gate 22, where Flight 447 was still listed as boarding. She put her phone away. She looked at the window and watched a fuel truck move slowly across the tarmac in the distance, doing its unremarkable work. 4 floors below the terminal, and the temperature-controlled server rooms that housed Transcontinental Airways' operational backbone, the digital infrastructure hummed along exactly as it always had, until, without any warning that the monitoring systems were capable of flagging in time to be useful, it didn't. The first alert appeared on the IT monitoring dashboard at 11:47 a.m., a single anomalous flag, the kind that could be a sensor glitch or a network hiccup, easily dismissed in the normal operations of a complex system. The technician on duty, Paul, 26 years old and on hour 7 of a 9-hour shift, almost logged it as a ghost error and moved on. Almost. The second alert came 31 seconds later, then 3 more in rapid succession, then the entire left panel of the dashboard, which had been uniformly green across its full display surface for the past 4 hours, shifted to amber, then to red, in a cascade that moved faster than Paul could track. He was already reaching for his supervisor's extension when the main system monitor went completely dark. What the... Get IT security on the line right now. His supervisor, Karen, was already standing, already on her own phone, already in the rapid response register that she reserved for situations where normal troubleshooting vocabulary no longer applied. Get network operations. Get the infrastructure team. Get... She stopped because 4 more screens in the room had just gone dark simultaneously. Get everyone who has a badge in this building. Everyone. The blackout did not stay contained to the dispatch center. It moved through transcontinental systems the way a controlled burn moves through dry grass, with a precision that suggested it knew exactly where it was going and had no interest in where it wasn't. In the Fuel Management Coordination Office on the airport's eastern side, a subcontractor named Harold was midway through approving 7 routine fueling authorizations, including, among them, the authorization for Flight 447, when his system locked him out entirely. His credentials, which had processed a transaction successfully 20 seconds earlier, now returned access denied, regardless of how many times he entered them. He tried his backup credentials. Same result. He tried the emergency override protocol. The screen returned a message he had never seen before in 11 years of working this job. Contract status terminated. Authorization suspended pending contractual review. Contact Transcontinental Legal Department. He called his supervisor. His supervisor called the fuel company's regional director. The regional director called their corporate headquarters. The corporate headquarters called their legal department after discovering that their contract with Transcontinental Airways had, according to their own internal legal management system, been formally and completely terminated at 11:48 a.m. Not suspended, not flagged for review, terminated, with severance provisions paid out, documentation filed, and the whole administrative trail present and stamped. Nobody at Transcontinental had authorized a termination. Nobody at Transcontinental could identify any human being who had. Simultaneously, not sequentially, simultaneously, ground crews in Dallas, Chicago, Charlotte, and Atlanta received automated compliance alerts through their official maintenance coordination channels, instructing them to suspend all active service procedures on transcontinental aircraft pending a contractual audit. The alerts came with valid authorization codes. They came through official, authenticated channels. Every single credential was legitimate and traceable back to Transcontinental Airways' own systems. The ground crews stopped work. They had no legal basis to do otherwise. In Dallas, a supervisor named Frank stood on the tarmac next to a Transcontinental 737 that was 40 minutes from departure and stared at the halt notification on his tablet and called his regional coordinator and said, "I don't know what to tell you. The order's valid. Until someone tells me it's been rescinded from a source I can verify, we're stopped." At Chicago O'Hare, 3 aircraft that had been scheduled for a rolling departure window between noon and 1 p.m. sat on the tarmac while their ground crews stood nearby having the same conversation in different words. Is this real? We can't confirm it isn't, so we have to treat it as if it is. Back in first class on Flight 447, Derek had just finished telling the cabin that there would be a brief delay due to a technical matter when one of the ground crew knocked on the aircraft door with the particular urgency that airline staff learned to distinguish from routine communication. Derek stepped outside. He was gone for 50 seconds. He came back with an expression that Vivian would later spend considerable time describing to her therapist, the expression of a man who has just encountered something he does not have a category for. "What is it?" Vivian asked, champagne glass still in hand. Derek looked at her. He looked at the cabin. He looked at the passengers who were already reading the situation in his face and beginning to shift in their seats. "We're grounded," he said. Vivian's glass lowered slightly. "Mechanically? They can reroute us to another aircraft." "No." Derek looked at the forward galley, then back at the cabin. "Not mechanically. All of them. Every aircraft on the tarmac. The entire fleet is grounded." A passenger in 3B said, "What do you mean, entire fleet?" Derek said, "I mean what I said. If you're already locked in, hit subscribe and drop a comment. How far do you think he'll actually go?" The story broke on social media before it reached a single news desk because two passengers with functioning Wi-Fi had uploaded their first-class footage from Gate 22's terminal before Transcontinental had officially declared anything. By noon, there were 4 separate clips circulating, different angles, different phones, different moments from the same sequence of events. One caught the moment Jessica's hand closed around Helena's wrist. One caught Vivian's face when she'd looked at the bruise. One caught Helena walking off the aircraft with her careful, measured gait, carry-on in hand, saying absolutely nothing. The 4th clip caught Derek saying the words, "Entire fleet is grounded," and the silence in first class that followed them. By 1 p.m., the hashtag Seat2A was trending in 7 cities. By 2 p.m., a Transcontinental spokesperson was on live television with a prepared statement that begins with, "We take all passenger complaints extremely seriously," and ends with, "We are conducting a thorough internal review," which are sentences that exist precisely because they commit to nothing while sounding like they commit to something. She delivered them with practiced poise. Then her earpiece produced a sentence from her producer, and her poise recalibrated slightly, and she said something about technical difficulties, and she did not return after the commercial break. She had just learned about the fuel contracts. In a building 4 miles from the airport, an office block that housed, depending on which floor you were on, a consulting firm, an import-export company, a logistics management operation, and 3 other businesses whose primary function was largely organizational, a man named Ezra Anderson was standing at a floor-to-ceiling window on the 7th floor, looking at the city below him with the particular patience of someone who has never in his adult life needed to hurry anything, because things moved when he wanted them to move. He was 37 years old. He was wearing a suit that had been made for his specific measurements because he was not a standard shape, broad through the shoulders, long in the arm, with the kind of physical presence that made rooms reorganize their geometry around him without anyone quite being able to articulate how or why. He had his mother's eyes and his father's jaw, and, if you asked him, his sister's stubbornness, which he would tell you she had actually inherited from him. Behind him, Solomon, tall, precise, the operational center of Ezra's infrastructure, stood with a tablet and the settled composure of a man who had worked in this room for 9 years and had stopped being surprised by the scale of things some time ago. "Fuel contract termination confirmed on their end," Solomon said. "Their legal team is running it against every internal authorization record they have. No human signature, no traceable user action. The system processed it as a fully authorized termination with no identifiable originator. They'll try to reverse it. They'll try. The process takes weeks under normal conditions, and the subcontractor's legal team has already issued a hold in place because they're not certain which party bears liability for the termination event. They can't act until that's resolved." Ezra watched a line of taxis move through the intersection below him. Ground crews? Dallas, Charlotte, Chicago, and here. All 4 holds are active and legally bulletproof. Ground crews can service any other carrier operating today, not Transcontinental. The hold language is specific. The union? Solomon consulted his tablet. The baggage handler's local chapter received documentation this morning about Transcontinental's 2019 overtime settlement violations. Their shop steward is currently on a call with their legal team. The documentation is accurate and complete. There's nothing Transcontinental can challenge in it. "I know. I sourced it." Solomon nodded without expression. What's the stock doing? Down 9.2% as of the last update, trending toward 12 by close at current trajectory. Ezra was quiet for a moment. He turned from the window. In the better light of the room's interior, his face showed something that Solomon had learned to read over 9 years. Not anger exactly, not the hot, reactive version, something colder and more deliberate, the expression of a man who has converted emotion into architecture. He has bruises. He said it the way you say something you have already processed and are simply stating for the record. I know. Not from the aircraft. 3 days earlier. She left the situation. She was supposed to be on this flight to put distance between herself and it, to get somewhere quiet, somewhere safe. He paused. The airline didn't give her those bruises. I'm not confused about that. Another pause. But they looked at a woman who was already hurt, and they decided that keeping a louder, wealthier passenger comfortable was worth more than protecting someone who was already dealing with something they didn't choose and shouldn't have had to deal with. He moved toward the desk. That's a decision. You make that kind of decision, there should be a price attached to it. Solomon said nothing. He had learned over 9 years in this room that some statements were not invitations to respond. What's the labor action status? Ezra asked, sitting down. The baggage handler's local chapter received the overtime documentation at 9 this morning. Their shop steward has been on the phone with legal counsel for the past 2 hours. Based on what we provided, they have a legitimate and solid case for a formal grievance that will take Transcontinental months to navigate, regardless of how this afternoon ends. The documentation is accurate? Entirely. Sourced from Transcontinental's own filings. The 2019 settlement had a compliance rider the airline hasn't met in 2 of the past 4 reporting cycles. We made it visible to the people it directly affects. Good. Ezra looked at his screen. The catering subcontracts. Touch them or leave them? Solomon considered. 90% of their in-flight catering at this airport runs through 2 companies. One has a silent partner relationship that traces back to 3 of our infrastructure investments. The other has a labor agreement renewal coming up in 6 weeks. We haven't activated either. He paused. We don't need to. Leave them, Ezra said. Fuel, maintenance, labor. That's the scope. I want them to understand what they're dealing with and make a rational decision. I don't want them to feel entirely surrounded. Surrounded produces panic, and panic produces federal involvement and conversations I don't want to have. Understood. Where is the stock? Down 11.5 at last check, trending toward 14. Ezra nodded. He opened his laptop and was quiet for a moment, reading. Then, the woman in seat 2A, Vivian Ashford Cole. What do we know about her? Socialite and lifestyle influencer, net worth in the low 8 figures, heavy brand partnership income. She has 4 million social followers, though that figure has been declining for the past 2 quarters. She has 4 active endorsement contracts and a 5th under negotiation. Solomon paused. She posted about the incident 22 minutes ago. It's already generating significant negative response. What did she say? Solomon read from his tablet. She described the day as an unhinged airline experience and referenced, quote, finally getting the seat she was owed after a clerical disaster. Ezra looked at his screen without expression. She'll delete it. Almost certainly. It won't matter. No, Solomon agreed. It won't. A silence settled over the room. Outside, the city continued its afternoon business, the ordinary traffic of 100,000 people moving through their ordinary days, none of them aware that somewhere in their midst, a fleet of aircraft had been quietly frozen in place over a bruised woman in a window seat. Calloway's office is trying to reach you, Solomon said. Let them try for a while longer. I want him on the phone within the hour. Not a VP, not legal, not a spokesperson. Him. I'll have him for you in 30 minutes. Good. He opened his laptop. Tell Celeste to take Helena food. She hasn't eaten since yesterday and she won't ask. Solomon was already walking to the door when he stopped. What are the terms when Calloway calls? Ezra looked up. 3 things, he said. Public accountability, systemic policy change, and accountability for the individuals involved. He looked back at his screen. I'll explain the specifics to him directly. I want him to hear them from me. Richard Calloway had spent 31 years building transcontinental airways from a regional operation into a national carrier, and in those 31 years, he had navigated 4 labor disputes, 3 fuel crises, 2 global disruptions that had restructured the entire industry, and 1 runway incident in Phoenix that the communications department had quietly managed for 3 years. He had been in difficult rooms before. He had been in rooms where the stakes were large and the options were few. He had never had a morning like this one. The boardroom held 11 people. They represented legal, operations, IT security, communications, finance, and human resources. Several of them had documents. Several of them had the careful expressions of people who were about to deliver information they would have preferred to deliver to someone else. "Talk to me," Richard said. As of approximately 11:47 a.m., said the head of IT security, a former federal contractor named William, we experienced a cascading system event across our dispatch infrastructure, fuel management integration, and ground services coordination platform. We have not identified a point of unauthorized entry. Our systems were not compromised in any conventional sense. Whoever is responsible operated through legitimate credentials and authorized channels, all of which are traceable back to our own systems. Meaning someone inside the company? That's what we checked first. We've audited everyone with administrative-level access. There are no unauthorized sessions, no anomalous logins. The credentials used were real, the processes were real, but there is no person we can identify who executed them. William paused. It's as if the system authorized itself. That is not possible, Richard said. No, sir, it isn't, but here we are. Patricia, the head of legal, leaned forward. She had the particular posture of someone who was about to add a problem to a problem. Richard, we have a compounding issue. The fuel subcontractor is showing our contract as terminated in their system, not in dispute. Terminated, with severance provisions paid out automatically. Their legal team is holding in place because they can't establish which party initiated the action. Richard looked at her carefully. How long to resolve that? Under normal litigation timelines, 6 to 8 weeks. Under expedited review, 3 to 4. Until then, neither party can act on the original contract terms. And the ground crews? The operations chief, Michael, consulted his notes. Compliance holds in all 4 cities, Dallas, Charlotte, Chicago, and here. The language of the holds is legally sound. Our counsel reviewed it. We can challenge the process, but the challenge process itself takes time we don't currently have if we want to resume operations. Richard absorbed this. He looked at the table. Is this connected to the passenger incident this morning? Another of those silences that are not about not knowing. Marcus, the head of security, former federal agent, calm and direct, cleared his throat. We believe the incidents are connected, yes. Connected how? To whom? The woman in seat 2A is Helena Anderson. He said the surname with the specific weight of someone placing an object carefully on a table. Her brother is Ezra Anderson. He operates a logistics and private infrastructure company out of this city. He has direct or indirect relationships with a significant number of labor and transportation contracts across the southeastern United States, including several that overlap with our own service infrastructure. You're telling me, Richard said slowly, that the man who just paralyzed my airline is the brother of the woman our staff removed from a flight this morning? Yes, sir. A long, specific silence. Is he reachable? He's calling you, Richard's assistant said through the intercom. His office is on line 3. They say his name is Ezra Anderson and that you'll want to take it. Richard looked at Marcus. Marcus's expression was the expression of a man who is trying to communicate in a single look. Take the call, do not make promises, listen more than you talk, And remember that this person already has whatever leverage he needs. Richard picked up the phone. Mr. Calloway. The voice was calm. Not warm, not cold. Business temperature. I appreciate you taking the call. Mr. Anderson. Richard had managed his own voice for 31 years. It was steady. I understand you may have information relevant to the operational situation we're currently experiencing. I have complete information about the operational situation you are currently experiencing, Ezra said. I caused it. I want to be clear about that from the beginning, because I'm not interested in having a conversation that's organized around ambiguity. Across the boardroom table, Marcus had gone very still. Patricia had her pen suspended above her notepad. The head of communications had the expression of someone watching a car accident in real time and knowing there is nothing useful they can do. Richard said carefully, "That's a significant admission. It's a clarification. I want you to know exactly who you're talking to and why before we discuss what comes next." A brief pause. Your airline removed my sister from a first-class seat she had paid for while she was injured in order to accommodate another passenger whose only relevant qualification was that she spent more money with you annually. Your staff made a decision, a choice, and I'd like to discuss what that choice costs. Mr. Anderson, I want you to understand that what happened to Miss Anderson this morning was deeply... Mr. Calloway. The voice did not rise. It had no need to. I know what you're about to say. I've heard the version of it that will be released to the press. I've seen the template. Deeply regrettable. Isolated incident. Does not reflect our values. Thorough review. A pause. I'm not interested in the template. I'm interested in what actually changes. Richard met Patricia's eyes. She made a small, careful gesture that translated accurately as, "Do not speak faster than you're thinking." "What is it you're looking for?" Richard asked. "3 things," Ezra said. "First, public accountability. A press conference, led by you personally, that names specifically what your staff did wrong, why it was wrong, and what decision-making culture produced it. Not a spokesperson, not a tweet. You, on camera, saying the actual words." "I understand," Richard said. "Second, systemic change. New passenger protection protocols, drafted with input from an independent third party, implemented within 60 days and subject to annual independent audit. I'll provide you with names of credible organizations for the oversight role." "And the third?" A pause. "The individuals responsible for my sister's removal, the flight attendants who physically handled her, the supervisor who gave the order, and the executive layer that created a culture where that order felt safe to give, are no longer employed by your airline." Richard felt the room's attention shift. "You're asking me to terminate. I'm telling you the conditions under which your fleet returns to operation." Not aggressive, not threatening in tone, simply informational. "You currently have 47 aircraft on the ground across 4 cities. Your fuel subcontracts cannot be serviced, your maintenance holds are legally grounded and will survive any challenge your legal team files in the next 72 hours. You have a labor action expanding as of this afternoon. Your stock has dropped 11% since noon. By close of market today, I estimate 15 to 17. By end of week, absent any change, the number is materially worse." He paused. "The terms I've outlined are reasonable. You know they're reasonable. The press conference is the hardest part, and it's the most necessary part." Richard looked at his CFO, who had been tracking the stock figure on his laptop. The expression confirmed everything. "You understand," Richard said, "that this could be characterized as extortion." "Yes," Ezra said, "I understand that completely, and I've considered it carefully. You're welcome to pursue that characterization. Your legal team can assess how it plays out when the opposing party has comparable resources, better lawyers, and the complete and documented cooperation of 4 independent contractors who can demonstrate that every action taken was legally traceable and contractually within scope. A pause. Or you can agree to what I've asked, make a genuine public accounting of what your staff did today, and reopen operations by tomorrow morning. Those are your actual options. The boardroom was quiet enough that the air conditioning was audible. Richard looked at the table. He looked at Patricia. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the communications chief. He looked at the head of HR, whose expression suggested she already knew what the right answer was and was waiting for him to catch up. He thought about 31 years. He thought about the footage, which he had watched on his laptop between receiving the first alert and walking into this room. Helena Anderson's careful walk, her quiet voice, the specific expression on her face when she'd looked at seat 2A one last time before leaving it. I need 12 hours to brief my board, he said. You have 8, Ezra said. And one more thing. A brief pause. I want a meeting, tonight. The flight attendants involved, the passenger who took my sister's seat, and my sister, in person, at the airport. I want everyone in the same room. Richard said nothing for a moment. I can arrange the meeting. I can't compel attendance from the other passenger. You won't need to compel her. She'll come. He said it without any particular emphasis, as though it were simply a known fact. 8 hours, Mr. Calloway. The line went quiet. Richard set the phone down. He looked at his boardroom. 11 faces looked back at him, each of them doing the individual calculation that people do when they are determining what they are prepared to say out loud versus what they are merely thinking. Legal opinion, he said to Patricia. She set her pen down. The terms as stated are achievable. The press conference is uncomfortable, but not legally problematic from a defamation standpoint, as long as we're factually accurate, which I believe we can be. The policy changes are overdue. We've had 2 compliance advisories in the past 18 months recommending exactly this kind of passenger protection protocol review. Implementing them under these circumstances is embarrassing but not unusual for this industry. She paused. The terminations are the part with the most legal exposure. We'll need documentation, process, and we'll need to ensure the affected employees are offered appropriate severance. Can we do it all in 8 hours? We can have the framework committed to in writing within 8 hours. Full execution takes longer, but a signed commitment to execution is what he's asking for, I believe. Richard nodded. He looked at Marcus. Is he the kind of person who accepts a commitment in good faith and monitors execution? In my assessment, Marcus said, yes. He's not looking for an ongoing conflict. He's looking for a specific result. If the result is delivered, the conflict is over. A pause. If it isn't, it won't be. That's a reasonable assessment of most people, the CFO said quietly. It's a more precisely delivered version than most people, Marcus said. Richard looked at the communications chief. Draft the press conference language. Get me a first version in 90 minutes. Assume we're going with it. He stood. And get me the HR protocols for the termination process. We're going to do this correctly. He paused at the head of the table. And someone find out how she is. Miss Anderson, find out what happened to her after she left the aircraft and whether she's been attended to. There was a brief silence. Sir? She was removed from our aircraft while she was injured, Richard said. Find out how she is. By 4 in the afternoon, the story had outgrown the travel section of every outlet covering it and landed in the main evening news cycle. A cable channel ran a split screen. On the left, the original first-class footage. On the right, a crawl tracking transcontinental stock price in real time. 2 legal analysts debated for 17 minutes whether what had purportedly happened to the airline's infrastructure constituted a legitimate civil action conducted through unconventional means or a coordinated criminal enterprise with legal camouflage. They did not agree. The debate was interesting, but neither analyst had access to the fuel contracts documentation. Neither had spoken to any of the 4 ground crews. Neither knew that the compliance holds had been reviewed by 3 independent attorneys before being deployed. The argument they were having was about a version of events that was incomplete, which is how Ezra had wanted it, because an incomplete story is harder to act against than a complete one. Vivian Ashford Cole had landed safely via a competitor carrier and was in a hotel suite with her travel assistant and a room service menu when she made the mistake of posting about the incident. The post described the day as an absolutely unhinged airline experience and included a casual reference to finally getting the seat I was owed after a clerical disaster. It went up at 4:17 p.m. and accumulated responses at a velocity that her social media manager would later describe, very specifically, as the kind of thing that ends careers if you don't move in the first 20 minutes. Vivian deleted it at 4:59 p.m. The screenshots had already been shared 300,000 times. Her publicist called at 5:02 p.m., her lawyer called at 5:19 p.m., her business manager called at 5:34 p.m. to tell her that two separate brand partnerships had reached out to her management with concerns about the current press environment and whether this moment might naturally invite a reassessment of the relationship. A third brand, one she had worked with for 4 years, had not called at all, which was worse. The fourth call, which she had not anticipated, came from an editor at a lifestyle publication that had profiled her twice and was reportedly preparing a third profile. The editor did not ask any questions. She simply said, with the measured politeness of someone who had made a decision before dialing, "We're going to hold the peace for now, Vivian. We think the timing isn't right." Then she hung up before Vivian could respond. Vivian put the phone down on the hotel suite's desk and looked at it for a long moment. Her assistant, who had been in the room for all of this, was looking at his own shoes with the disciplined attention of someone who has learned that sometimes being in a room means being invisible in it. "Say something," Vivian said. "I think," her assistant said carefully, still studying his shoes, "that the post was a mistake." "I know it was a mistake. I deleted it. 40 minutes after posting, on a day when a lot of people were already watching." Vivian stood up and walked to the window. The city below her went about its business. Traffic moved. People moved. The infrastructure of daily life hummed along, indifferent to what was happening in a hotel suite 7 floors above it. She thought about the look on her own face in the clip. She had watched it 3 times now, trying to find an angle from which it looked like something other than what it was. There wasn't one. It was her actual face, having an actual thought, captured in actual time by a stranger's phone. You couldn't argue with it. You couldn't contextualize it into something else. She thought about the bruise on the woman's face. She thought about the careful way she had moved, the precise and deliberate placement in every step, the posture of someone managing something internal. She thought about how she had looked at all of that and filed it under "not my problem" and gone ahead with her champagne order. She wasn't accustomed to feeling ashamed of herself. She had spent considerable effort and money constructing a life in which shame was an emotion that happened to other people. But there it was, sitting in the room with her, taking up space. She was on the phone with all 3 of them in overlapping succession when her assistant knocked on the suite door and said there were 2 men in the lobby who identified themselves as representatives of someone named Anderson, and that they were polite, and that they said she was expected at a meeting that evening. Vivian stared at her assistant. "Expected?" she said. That was the word they used. She thought about calling the police. She held the thought for about 5 seconds, looking at it from different angles, and then she thought about the footage, specifically the 2-second clip of her own face when she'd looked at the bruise. And she thought about the word expected and what it implied, and she thought about the brand partnerships and the 300,000 screenshots. "Tell them I'll be downstairs in 20 minutes, she said. The meeting room occupied a quiet wing of the airport's administrative building, the kind of room that exists for conversations requiring privacy and no official record. Long table, adjustable lighting, a wall of glass overlooking an empty, darkened terminal. The silence of a room that had been cleared. Helena arrived first. She had changed into clothes that were softer, easier. The bruise was unchanged because bruises don't respond to the resolution of situations. She sat at one end of the table with tea that Celeste had brought, holding the cup in both hands, and she looked at the empty terminal and thought about the kind of nothing you think about when you've spent a day navigating something exhausting and you're almost at the end of it. Derek arrived next. He sat across from her. He opened his mouth and closed it. "You don't have to say anything yet," Helena said. "We're waiting." Jessica arrived looking as though someone had taken all the certainty out of her face and left a question behind. She sat next to Derek and looked at the table. Vivian came last. She came through the door and saw Helena and stopped walking. She had been expecting, she wasn't sure what she'd been expecting. Not this. Not the same woman, same room, face to face, with nothing between them. Ezra came in behind Vivian. He did not position himself at the head of the table. He moved to a chair along the side, sat down, and looked at everyone in the room once, briefly, with the assessment of a person who has already read the situation and is checking whether reality matches the briefing. Derek placed him after about 4 seconds. His posture changed slightly. "Thank you for coming," Ezra said. He looked at his sister, then at the others. "I want to be clear about what this meeting is. The negotiation with Mr. Calloway concluded this afternoon. The terms are agreed. The announcement is tomorrow morning. This meeting is not about any of that." "What is it about?" Vivian asked. Her voice had the texture of someone who had prepared for multiple versions of this conversation and wasn't sure which one she'd walked into. "It's about the moment," Ezra said. "The decision each of you made in that cabin today." He looked at Derek. "Tell me what you decided." Derek looked at the table. He looked at Helena. He looked at his own hands and seemed to be deciding something about honesty. "I decided," he said, slowly, carefully, like someone reading from a ledger, that the path of least resistance was to move Miss Anderson rather than enforce the policy I was trained to enforce. He stopped, breathed. "I knew the regulation. I've applied it before in situations that were less visible, less complicated. Today I just decided not to." He looked at Helena. "Because she was quiet, and you—" He stopped. "And I wasn't the passenger you wanted to have a conflict with, because I wasn't loud enough, or connected enough, or the right kind of worth protecting." He didn't say yes. He didn't need to. The silence said it for him. Ezra said. Jessica had been crying quietly for the past several minutes with the kind of contained discipline that comes from not wanting to make someone else's experience about your own discomfort. She looked up. I put my hand on her arm. She wasn't resisting, she wasn't aggressive. She was telling us a regulation, and she was correct about the regulation, and I put my hand on her arm anyway because I'd already decided what was going to happen. She looked at Helena directly. "I'm so sorry. I know it doesn't change what it was." "No," Helena said, "it doesn't. But I hear you." Ezra looked at Vivian. Vivian had been sitting with the careful posture of someone who came in with a prepared statement and has realized in the past 3 minutes that it doesn't fit the room. "I didn't ask you how you were," she said. The words came out smaller than she had intended them to. "I saw the bruise and I registered it and I filed it somewhere that wasn't my concern. I wanted the seat and everything else was secondary to that." She looked at Helena. "That was wrong. I know it was wrong. I think I knew it then too." "I think you did." The room was quiet for a long moment. "You'll be blacklisted," Ezra said to Vivian. He said it without particular satisfaction, the way you say something that is simply true. Not through anything illegal, not through anything that can be challenged, but there are businesses in this city that operate under agreements that touch my work in some way. They will not be available to you. That situation changes when the public statement you make about this incident is honest, specific, and does not attempt to position you sympathetically at the cost of accuracy. I'll know the difference. Vivian held his gaze. "That's fair," she said. "I know," he said. He looked at Derek and Jessica. "You're no longer employed by Transcontinental. That was part of this morning's agreement. Your HR department will have communicated that already." He paused. "What you do next is your own, but if your work involves people, and it will, whatever it is, I'd suggest that today is worth thinking about. Not the part where you lost your jobs, the part where the calculation seemed obvious and you made the wrong choice anyway. That's the part that matters going forward." Neither of them argued. Neither of them looked away. There was a long silence in the room. Outside the glass wall, the empty terminal sat in its evening stillness, abandoned check-in counters, darkened gate displays, the particular silence of a public space after hours that has the quality of held breath. Jessica was looking at the table. Derek was looking at his hands. Vivienne was looking at nothing specific, her eyes unfocused, doing the private arithmetic that follows a day that has rearranged your understanding of yourself. Helena looked at all three of them for a moment. She looked the way you look at something that has cost you significantly and that you are deciding in real time how much of you it actually gets to keep. "I want to say one thing," she said. Her voice was the same temperature it had been all day, quiet, precise. Not as an accusation, just as a fact. She looked at Derek first, then Jessica, then briefly at Vivienne. "I was already hurt when I boarded that aircraft, not from anything that happened on the plane, something that happened before it, and I boarded anyway because I had somewhere to be, and because I had a ticket, and because getting from one place to another should not require being uninjured in order to receive the basic treatment the law guarantees you." She paused. "You looked at me and decided the information written on my face was not your concern. That is the thing I would like each of you to carry forward. Not as guilt. Guilt isn't useful very long, but as knowledge about what happens when you decide that someone is less worth protecting because they're quieter, or more hurt, or harder to advocate for than the person who's louder." She stopped. "That's all." The room was quiet again. Derek's hands had stopped moving entirely. Jessica had pressed her fingers to her mouth briefly and then lowered them. Vivienne looked directly at Helena for the first time since walking in, and her expression was the expression of someone who has understood something they cannot ununderstand. "Thank you for saying that," Derek said quietly. Helena nodded once. She did not say "you're welcome" because the moment didn't call for it. Ezra stood. He looked at his sister. "Ready?" he said. Just that. Helena looked at the table one more time, at Derek's hands, at Jessica's careful face, at Vivienne's expression, which had moved into something she hadn't worn when she'd walked in, something less defended and somehow more honest for it. She looked at the empty terminal beyond the glass, all that cavernous quiet illuminated gold in the evening light. She stood, she picked up her bag, she walked toward the door. Ezra walked beside her. "The press release goes out at 7 a.m., he said to Solomon, who was waiting in the corridor with his tablet and the expression of someone who had managed an enormous amount in a single day and was still in the middle of managing it. "Make sure Calloway has signed the final version. He has concerns about Section 3. Section 3 stands. He signed for a reason. He'll hold. I know he will." They walked out into the main hall, which was nearly empty now, the last flights of the day concluded, the departure boards cycling silently through tomorrow's roster of destinations. Somewhere behind them, the administrative wing's lights were being dimmed. The airport was entering its overnight register, reduced, quieter, stripped of its daytime purpose, but not entirely still. "You didn't have to do all of this," Helena said. She wasn't arguing, she wasn't objecting, she was just saying it, the way you say things to someone who knows you well enough that you don't need to perform what you mean. "I know. It's going to be in the news for weeks. It already is." She looked at him sideways. "People have opinions about how you did it. They'll have opinions either way." He looked at her. "How are the ribs?" She exhaled slowly, a careful breath, the kind that tests its own edges. "Sore." Celeste made dinner, not hotel food, not terminal food, actual food. "Ezra." "What?" She stopped walking. He stopped with her. The departure board above them cycled through tomorrows, destinations she'd never been to, times she'd never catch, lives that had nothing to do with seat 2A, or a woman who had learned to keep her voice quiet in rooms where loud things happened. In the distance, section by section, the last lights of the terminal were being switched off. "Thank you," she said. He looked at her for a moment. The bruise, the careful, deliberate posture, the fact of her standing here at all, having navigated everything the day had required of her without once losing the thread of her own dignity. "Don't thank me," he said. "Just come eat something." They walked out together into the night, and the airport closed quietly behind them, and somewhere on 4 different tarmacs in 4 different cities, 47 aircraft sat waiting for morning clearance that they would receive precisely on schedule, exactly as agreed. At 7:06 the following morning, Richard Calloway stood before a bank of cameras and microphones in Transcontinental's corporate headquarters lobby and delivered a statement. It had been reviewed by legal, it had been shaped by communications, and it had been returned to him, twice, by Ezra Anderson's office with notes that said, each time, simply, more specific. The final version was specific. It named what had happened in Seat 2A. It named the decision that had been made. It named the culture that had made that decision feel safe and routine. It did not use the phrase regrettable miscommunication. It did not use the phrase isolated incident. It used the phrase a failure of judgment rooted in a systemic problem we created, and we are the ones responsible for fixing it. It was the most honest thing Richard Calloway had said to a camera in 31 years, and he made it not because honesty had suddenly become his default, but because somewhere between the boardroom and the phone call and the report of the meeting he had not attended, he had done a calculation and arrived at the same answer it always arrived at. The cost of continuing is higher than the cost of changing. The stock recovered. The fuel contracts were restructured within 3 weeks, faster than Patricia had projected, because the subcontractor's legal team found, upon further review, that the termination events had been accompanied by severance documentation so precise and complete that contesting it would cost more than accepting the renegotiation terms. The maintenance holds were lifted the morning after the press conference, as agreed. New passenger protection protocols were completed in 51 days, 9 days ahead of the deadline. The independent oversight body that drafted them included 2 representatives from organizations that had worked with Ezra Anderson's logistics network for years. Richard noted this and said nothing about it. The annual audit was scheduled and held. Vivian Ashford Cole issued a public statement 13 days after the incident. It was specific. It was accurate. It named what she had done and why it was wrong. It did not use the phrase both sides, or misunderstanding, or context. Her publicist noted to 3 separate journalists that it had been written without professional communications assistance. This was true. Several journalists found it notable. 4 of the 17 businesses resumed their working relationship with her within the month. Others took longer. She did not try to accelerate the timeline. She had understood in that meeting room that the timeline was not hers to set. She had not asked anyone to move from their seats since. Derek enrolled in a paralegal program focusing on passenger and consumer rights law. He didn't speak publicly about the airport meeting. He didn't need to. He'd already carried what he'd learned from it, and he'd decided that what he did with it mattered more than what he said about it. Jessica was hired 4 months later by a regional carrier whose HR department had quietly received a letter of indirect recommendation from a logistics organization with ties to Ezra Anderson's network. She was good at the job. She was careful in a different way now, not the careful of managing optics, but the careful of someone who looked at the gap between what she knew was right and what she had done instead, and decided to close it. Helena healed. Not quickly, not all at once, but steadily and without interruption, the way things heal when the conditions are finally right for them. She spent 3 weeks at a house outside the city, a place she hadn't known Ezra owned, with a garden that Celeste tended, and mornings that asked nothing of her, and afternoons where she sat in the sun and read things she'd been meaning to read, and did not have to manage anything. She slept. She ate real meals at a table. She let her ribs knit themselves back together without asking them to perform recovery on a schedule. She went back to her work eventually. She booked a flight, different airline, different route, window seat, and sat in the seat she'd paid for, and nobody asked her to move, and the flight was completely uneventful, and she arrived where she was going exactly when the boarding pass said she would. That was how it was supposed to be. Just that. A woman on a plane.
a seat she had paid for, an arrival that didn't require a story. It should never have needed to be anything more than that. The fact that it had been, the fact that the only way a woman in pain could keep a seat that was legally hers was because her brother happened to own the invisible infrastructure that kept an airline's engines turning, that was the detail the analysts kept returning to in the weeks after the cameras moved on to the next thing. What does it mean, they asked, when accountability requires leverage? What does it mean when the enforcement of a right depends entirely on whether you happen to be connected to someone powerful enough to make the cost of ignoring you genuinely, materially unbearable? It means what it has always meant. It means the system works for the people it was designed to serve, and everyone else survives on whatever leverage they can find or build or inherit or earn. Ezra Anderson had leverage. He had used it with precision and without apology. His sister was safe and warm and fed and sitting in a garden that asked nothing of her. And 47 aircraft were flying again. And somewhere in a headquarters building, a CEO was going to spend the remainder of his career building something structurally different out of the wreckage of a decision that had cost far more than anyone in first class had understood when they'd ordered the champagne. Whether what Ezra had done was justice, or something that lived in justice's neighborhood without quite being it, was a question the analysts were still debating 3 months later. Helena was not debating it. She knew exactly what it was. It was a phone call. 2 rings. A voice that, when she said, "They're removing me from the aircraft," did not ask whether she tried the proper channels, or whether she was sure she hadn't misunderstood something, or whether this was really worth the trouble. It was a voice that said, "Go with them. Don't fight. I'll handle the rest." And then, without hesitation and without remainder, handled every single piece of it. Some people, hearing the story for the first time, focused on the power, on the reach, on the invisible hand that had moved through systems and contracts and labor agreements and turned them all toward a single purpose in the span of a single morning. They heard it as a story about what money and influence can do. And they weren't wrong. That was part of it. But the people who had been in that meeting room, in that quiet terminal, with the empty departure board cycling overhead, they remembered something smaller. A woman picking up her bag with careful hands. A voice that didn't rise above the temperature of certainty. A seat she had paid for, and a choice she had made to occupy it without apology. And the single phone call that had started everything that followed. Power is everywhere in this story. But so is something else. The thing that made Helena walk off that aircraft with her head up. The thing that made her sit on a terminal bench and breathe through the count of 4 instead of falling apart. The thing that made her speak, in a meeting room hours later, not with bitterness but with clarity, telling 3 people who had failed her exactly what she needed them to understand, and meaning every word of it. That's not power. That's something it takes a different kind of strength to carry. The fleet was flying. The seat was empty now. And somewhere above the clouds, on a different aircraft, headed somewhere better, a woman had her window and her quiet, and the particular piece of finally being exactly where she was supposed to be. If this story hit different, subscribe for more and support the channel. Grab us a coffee using the link in the description. Every cup keeps stories like this one coming your way.